Hello and welcome to Gnosis, my podcast about how we know what we know. And today's guest is Gamal Henessee, or this episode. I don't know what day this may air, but it may go up immediately, or I may want to sit on it a little bit. So on this episode of Gnosis, I have Gamal Henessee, author, lawyer, comic book nerd. Is that appropriate to call you that?
Yeah, but I don't read as many comic books as I would like because I'm doing so much work, which kind of defeats the purpose of why I got into the business in the first place. But that's what happens.
Well, that sometimes when we do what we love,
Mhm.
we lose the ability to love it because it's our job.
Yeah, well, it's not that I love comics any less. It's that I would like to read probably two or three times as many books as I do. I actually
Hmm.
buy all the comics that I want. It's great. But then the to read pile just gets bigger and bigger. And I'm like, okay, well, I got them. When will I ever read them? I don't
Right.
know.
Um, we were just kind of going over it, and we either had a dialogue over the internet or at a comic book show when you did a primer
Hmm.
of this book, and that was whatever 2003, so approaching 20 years.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm sure you don't remember me. You see thousands of faces, and I didn't look like this 20 years ago.
Okay.
I had more hair and less facial hair at the time,
Right.
um but your book, it was the I had gone through film school and had no idea. I was originally going to be a 2D animator. I started out loving comic books, decided sequential art wasn't for me. Always wanted to be a Disney animator. And then
Hmm.
Disney fired all their 2D animators halfway through my college term going to
Hmm.
film school. And then I became a more video centric and compositing and so on. But your book and what you shared in there was the only business education I had received on what you do as a creative individual.
Hmm. Hmm. You're
And
not
I
alone.
and I cannot tell you how. I mean, you don't offer advice on the film industry or what I actually do professionally, but it taught me a way to think about art as a career and
Hmm.
art as a business, because it is, right? I think there's articles about how Marvel would define work product as anything you do in their offices and stuff like that, but artists didn't know that at the time, so they would work on, you're an artist, so your attention floats. You may have a
Hmm.
deadline on something, but maybe you get an idea, and so you scribble it down, and because that piece of paper is physically at a comic book place, that becomes their property, unless you somehow take it out. And I have used that knowledge with your book to always keep my work separate from my job's work. Because why should my job get to profit off me twice when they're only paying me once?
Exactly. Exactly. It's
So
the
tell me,
kind.
go
Go
ahead. I'm
ahead. Go ahead.
sorry. No, no, no.
Well,
I'm pontificating, and I really want to hear from you. What inspired you to want to do this?
it's the origin story that I always tell. Actually, starts at Marvel. I was the international publishing manager there from 2001 to about 2003, and most of my job was actually taking the books that Marvel had released in the United States and then licensing them out to other countries to create secondary revenue streams. But the other thing that I had to do was I had to take care of a lot of the contracts for freelance writers and artists that were coming in to work on Marvel books. And the sequence of events always seemed to be the same. A person, the editor would select a writer and an artist and then send that person to me. That person invariably loved comics, grew up reading comics, always wanted to work for Marvel. So when they sat down in the chair, I would hand them a contract and say, okay, take this contract to your lawyer. ask them what they think of it. And if you have any questions or notes, you send it back to me and we'll work it out. But I knew the person sitting across from me didn't have an attorney. He knew he didn't have an attorney. He also knew that the only thing he wanted to really do in life was to work for Marvel. So he was going to sign whatever I put in front of him. He may hold on to it for a couple of days. He may try to read it. But in the end, he was just going to sign it. And he would actually sign away pretty much anything and everything he did as a work for hire, no matter whether that was a new character or a new storyline or a new anything. Marvel bases and DC and all companies that work for on a work for hire basis, they build their worth on the artistic creations of people who are largely not employees. They are freelancers who come in and say, they pitch an idea. Marvel says, the idea is great. That's a great new character. Sign this piece of paper, which will invariably be what's called a new character release agreement, which means every character you make, Marvel then owns and can do whatever they want with it. So if it spins out into a multi-billion-dollar film franchise, even though that's very unlikely because who's going to watch superhero movies, you're not going to necessarily get any money for that because you will only get what you actually agreed to in the contract. But if you never read the contract or you didn't understand the contract, then you probably won't get anything. So what I did when I left Marvel is I started a legal practice that primarily was just there to explain to people what they were getting into. In a lot of cases, they didn't necessarily have the leverage or the power to change the contract, but at least they knew what they were signing and they can go into it with open eyes. But like when you and I interacted, I had just started out in this field and I ran up against a lot of resistance because artists, where you're talking about graphic artists, writers, letters, inkers, all of these people, they do not necessarily, at least in 2003, didn't necessarily feel that they needed an attorney. They felt that was an unnecessary expense that was just going to get in the way of them doing what they wanted to do. It's only in the past 8-9 years that that mentality has shifted. So now more and more people understand that the business side of the comic book business is just as important, if not more important, than the comic book side of the comic book business. So that is a long answer as to why I do what I do, but the answer boils down to you have to give, I feel like people who are creators need to understand what it is that they're getting into and how, and that is going to actually ultimately help them create better art. Because once you remove the fear and the uncertainty of the business side, people are more free to actually do what they want without being concerned about having their ideas taken from them or having their revenue taken from them, or being forced to do things they don't want to do simply because they didn't understand the legal or business aspects of the industry.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot, right? I mean, as artists, we have to be great at what we do, not only for our own sake, but for the sake of the company that we're going to be working for. And not only that, no one's saving for our retirement, right? You know, it's like I worked on a documentary film about a world-class boxer. He originally had beat Mike Tyson to become the only super heavyweight gold medalist in the Olympics, period. Right. So that guy had cost Mike Tyson that claim. His name's Tyrell Biggs. He was a very nice guy. He was sweeping floors in a Philadelphia gym and making coffee money and living in his dad's house at 50 something years old. So he enjoyed what he had while he had it and had nothing left by the end of it. And I think of Jack Kirby when he split with Stan Lee.
Mhm.
The list goes on, right? But did Superman's rights just revert? Did I just hear that on the internet? Was that real?
No, what the story that you probably saw was that there's the anticipation that the rights to certain DC characters, Superman and Batman being the most prominent, would certain versions of them may enter into the public domain in 2034. It was a
Oh, okay.
story that I believe Business Insider put out, and they
Mm-hmm.
were basically looking forward another like 12 years because the way comic books and the way a lot of these business cycles work, you have to actually think 5, 10, 15 years down the line.
Mm.
Just as an example, like one of the bigger shows that Disney Plus has on TV now is She-Hulk. But
Mm-hmm.
She-Hulk was a property that started in like 1979, 1980.
Right.
This is not a brand new character we're talking about. This is an old character. But going back to the Superman concept, the idea is that certain intellectual property, after a certain period of time, according to copyright law, enters into something called the public domain, where then anyone in the public can use that intellectual property without getting any kind of license from the original copyright holder. You see, this is why you see a lot of stories with Sherlock Holmes and Dracula and remakes of like Shakespeare and things like that, because all of those works have entered into the public domain. Now the idea is, and people I believe have the false idea, that in 2034 you can just go out and make Superman or Batman comics or books or movies or anything else and not have to actually deal with the underlying company that owns that intellectual property, which in this case would be DC, Warner Brothers, and Discovery. But that is incorrect for a variety of reasons. Number one is that there are a lot of different versions of Superman that have been around since, I guess it's 1939. It is probably going to be the case that the one that was introduced in 1939 may enter the public domain.
Right.
If it does, then you can only make a Superman story about that version of Superman, which is a very different version of Superman than everybody knows today. So you may get the right to use a retro Superman for all the good it's going to get you.
Right.
However, Superman is not just something that is a copyright, which is the ability to actually sell the expressions of your idea. It is also a trademark, and a trademark is a image or word that you use to sell goods and services. DC has a trademark in Superman. That trademark is not entering into the public domain. So it is conceivable that you can make a Superman story, and as soon as you try to sell it under the name Superman, DC would come down and crush you because you are actually you're not violating their copyright, but you are violating their trademark. Their trademark arguably has more value than the copyright. And the thing that people don't immediately understand about lawsuits and litigation and things like that is that whether or not you are right in many cases, and this is my opinion as an attorney, whether you're right in many cases isn't the point. It's A, what you can prove, and B, what you can pay to prove. Because litigation is expensive. So even if you are in the right in what it is that you're doing, if you get sued by someone or dragged into court by someone who has a lot more money and resources than you, then A, you're not going to be able to keep up because they will simply outspend you.
Yeah.
And B, even if you win, the amount that you would have to spend is going to far outweigh whatever it is that you probably made, which means the whole thing was pointless in the beginning. So what you heard about Superman is a tangled web that when I posted a video about it on my YouTube channel, I recommended people don't even bother to get involved with that kind of thing, because the idea of Superman or Batman or any character is actually a very specific expression of a general idea. So if let's say you take the idea that a rich young man survives a violent criminal event, and then uses his money to get the skills and resources to fight crime outside the law.
Mm,
That is the origin of Batman. But
right.
it's also the origin of Moon Knight, Green Arrow, Iron Man, Iron Fist, Shadow, Nighthawk, and about 50 other characters. Each one of them is its own story. So if you
Right.
want to tell that story, or a variation on that story, you can go ahead and do that. You don't need Batman. You don't need to wait till 2034. And you don't have to worry about someone else trying to tell you what you can and cannot do. That is
Hmm.
the magic of this type of creativity, is that if you have a story, you can tell your story in ways that from a legal and business standpoint, you're completely safe.
Hmm. Yeah, I originally and if you admit the source material, is that a problem? Because I was going to admit something.
Um, well, when you say admit the source material,
In
because a
other
lot
words,
of
admit the inspiration.
um I don't believe, well, in most cases, I don't necessarily recommend admitting anything, but usually people can see it. Like if you take Moon Knight, you take Batman, you look at them together, you're like, at least the earlier versions of Moon Knight. You look at him, you go, okay, I see what you're doing. If you look at
Hmm.
Submariner, you look at Aquaman, nobody has to admit anything.
Right.
They know it's the same thing.
So how does fan fiction figure into the scenario? Like if I want to publish a story,
Mhm.
because I mean, let's face it, a lot of artists begin, you're told if you're a writer to begin with characters that exist so that you can have a sample that someone can see that you understand the voice of the character,
Mhm.
that you understand like what the episode is going to be about. Say you write a Friends episode spec,
Mhm.
um, and essentially what that is fan fiction, right?
Yes.
That's I'm writing something to create a story with characters that I don't own,
Mhm.
and I end up with 50 Shades of Grey.
Well, the thing about 50 Shades of Grey, and depending on how you use the fan fiction, is that she created something called a transformative work, which
Mhm.
means she took the ideas or the underlying concepts of something like Twilight, but changed it enough so that there was something new that came out the other end. If something
Mm-hmm.
new comes out the other end, then you have an original work, and that is, you have a copyright in that. And in that case, you can easily say, yeah, this was based on, the original idea was based on Twilight, but this is a radically different expression of that idea. And a
Mm-hmm.
new expression of an idea gets you a new copyright. It's this, just like if you say, well, there's a character called Catwoman.
Right.
I'm going to make a character called Black Cat. That is basically the same thing. But
Right.
if it is a new expression of the femme fatale cat burglar, well, then you get a copyright in that, and you can go off and make all the movies you want. It's great.
That's great.
Mhm.
What about, well, I don't want to phrase this. So I know you don't do music law, but
Mhm.
my dad's a musician. He recently was getting clearances for his albums that he's made.
Mhm.
He's always done the hard work of making sure he gets licenses and he gives attributions. He recently um, had taken some songs that another writer had co-written with him,
Mhm.
and filed for it and went through the whole process. But he was talking about there's a song by, oh God, I'm messing up, a band that sounds just like Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Okay.
And Credence, this is much later, sued him. John Fogerty sued him,
Mhm.
and the guy goes, "Yep, I totally was intending to sound like you." And he cut half his proceeds and gave them directly over because he had had a long-standing career before the song that made the money, and
Mhm.
he was intentionally trying to copy the other guy. But he was doing it with his own voice, his own playing, his own music. It's not like the other guy wrote the song. He could have told him to kick rocks, but he chose to share proceeds as a way to honor the source, I guess. Um, it does. Is that something that would be required of someone? Because I was greatly influenced by Jack Kirby
Mhm,
and John Carter, which I came to after seeing Star Wars. I didn't even
mhm,
know that Star Wars had been based on John Carter.
mhm, mhm,
Um, I read the original novels and I loved the movie
mhm.
when it came out. Um, so how does that play out? Like, am I always guaranteed to get attribution of a character I didn't mail into a copyright office, or as soon as I create the project and save it or have a piece of paper on it that can be dated to something, is that enough for a copyright? What does it take?
Well, a copyright is actually created in any what they call a fixed medium of expression. So if you
Mm-hmm.
have an idea and you type it into your laptop and you press save, you technically have a copyright in whatever it is that you just made. However,
Mm.
it is much easier to enforce your copyright once you actually send it to the copyright office.
Mm.
Now, the process of filing a copyright is fairly easy. It takes about, oh, 15, 20 minutes, and it is not expensive. Only costs like $65. And it gives you the ability to actually assert your rights in ways that would be far more costly and far more complicated if you just had a file on your hard drive with the idea written down on it. Um, like we were talking about a few minutes ago with litigation, if you just had that file and you did not actually have a copyright, you would then have to go through several steps in any potential litigation to prove you own that thing. Whereas if you just had the copyright, you would pull out the copyright and say, okay, we own that. And now that part of the litigation, that part of the argument is no longer an argument because you by
Mm.
definition own that thing. Whereas if you
Mm.
just have it like in a notebook in your desk drawer, well, who knows where that, how that's going to play out. And if that happens to get damaged or destroyed, now you got nothing. Whereas if you have
Mm.
it, if you have the copyright file, the Library of Congress will back you up and say, yeah, that's his. This is when he filed it. This is what it is.
That's great. So let's say I publish something online way back in the, like, you can go on the Internet Archive and look up one of my first websites.
Mhm,
Um, it had some characters on it that I created. I gave no defining characterizations about them other than I'd drawn them.
mhm.
Um, would that count as copyright, or would that be evidence of copyright that is meaningless because I didn't file it with the Library of Congress?
It would be evidence of copyright. It wouldn't be meaningless. It would just mean that you would have several other hurdles that you would have to jump through to actually establish your copyright in those characters. So
Ah.
it's not, it is not a, it is not a worthless exercise to actually fix your ideas into that medium of expression. It simply strengthens the concept that you own this intellectual property if you actually have that copyright. For example, let's say you wanted to sell the idea that you had in those characters to a production company or something like that. If they're doing their job right and they're going to do their due diligence, they want to make sure that you actually own what it is that you say you own, which
Mm-hmm.
means they're going to go into the copyright registration database and see, okay, where is his copyright for this thing he said he owned? And if they don't find it, they're going to they're going to need to dig deeper to make sure that you're not giving them an infringing the license for an infringing product, basically selling something you don't own.
Right.
So having that copyright sitting there in the Library of Congress, especially because it's so easy to do, there's really no downside to doing
Okay. Well, you convinced me that I need to start dumping a lot of my work into
it.
the
Mhm,
Library of Congress.
mhm.
Um, uh, so how does it work? You with artists and getting help. Like, I know you have this book. It's on the it's right there behind you. Why don't you
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about that?
Okay, well, this book was it came out of an idea that, like an evolution of the legal practice. Because, like I said, when I was at Marvel, I realized artists and writers didn't have anyone to actually explain to them how the legal side of comics work. So I
Mm-hmm.
started doing that, and I did that for about 10 years. And people were very appreciative of that work that I was doing. But as I was going through it, I saw that those same creators also needed help with project management and
Mm.
advertising and marketing and distribution and sales and all these other things that, so I was kind of only helping them halfway. So I decided to actually put together a complete guide to everything that you need to know if you want to start your own comic book company. From the day that you decide this is what I want to do, to the day that you have like a catalog of comics that you're going to leave in your will to the next generation, this book covers all of those things. It took me about, I want to say, 2.5 years to write. I released it in the spring of 2020. It's
Mm.
actually it's been received very well, and I'm actually working on the follow-up book that is going to be focusing on freelance comic book creators, the people who, because it's one thing to have an idea and say, I'm going to build a company, I'm going to invest in these characters, and I'm going to try to become a long-standing publisher. It's a different mindset and a different business model if your goal is, I'm going to make comics from someone else, and that's how I'm going to make my livelihood. You have a different revenue streams, different income, different positioning when you're negotiating contracts. All of these things are related to independent comic book publishing, but it's not. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm writing that next book, and with any luck, it will be out in 2023.
Wow. That's a lot of good stuff out there. One of the things I've always been impressed with in my life is you never know the impact you have.
Mhm.
And then when you have something come back around to you and someone goes, you're the one that led me down this righteous path, right?
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
always kind of like an amazing return. And gosh, I'm trying to figure out where I want to go with this. I really appreciated the time that you took when you were first starting out. I remember being super excited that I talked to someone from Marvel
Mhm.
or who had worked for Marvel, and for some reason I thought that that was going to be my ticket. I understand how things are going to work. It's required
Mhm.
a lot of work to do other things till now, but I'm encouraged by finding you again randomly through Clubhouse possibly or
Mhm.
LinkedIn, and reading the book that you have now, the full deal, so that I can publish my first real comic book. I helped my daughter publish her first poetry book.
Okay. Okay. Very good.
I'm helping my mother-in-law publish her first romance novel.
Mhm.
So if I can help them do that, I might as well publish my own work, right? At this point.
Exactly. Exactly. The idea that I had when I released the book, like the pie in the sky idea, is that if 10,000 people read this book over the next, I don't know, 10 years,
Hmm.
if one of them actually has the impact on the comic book industry that someone like Stan Lee had because they started out reading my book, that's all you can ask.
Right.
At this point, what I do know is that quite a few people are much more confident about jumping into the industry,
Hmm.
getting involved in it, because in addition to the book, because what I realized when after I published the book,
Hmm.
like any other book, especially a book that's informational and designed to help you do something,
Right.
especially in business, as soon as you ship the book off to the printer, that book is old. There's something in the book that is now wrong. So
Right.
I had two options. I could keep updating the book
Right.
through like my website or something like that, Or what I decided to do was I started a consulting program, a monthly consulting program that helps people walk through the business of comics as it changes. So over the last year and a half, we've had a lot of things with supply chain problems and censorship, and a lot of different issues have come down the pipe. And through this organization that I've built, I actually help people understand not just what's going on, but how all of these things are impacting their particular business, because every comic book publisher, every comic book business is unique, and help them navigate through all of those challenges. And it is very heartwarming, may be too trite a word to use, but to see their books actually get released and to know, okay, they were in my program and I helped them write their contracts and stuff. And now the book is actually out in the world. And, they send me copies of it, of course, that I don't get to read because the pile of books is getting larger and larger. But I
Right.
appreciate knowing that at least partially, because we helped them deal with those issues, they actually got to do what they wanted to do. Doesn't really get better than that.
No, I mean, you're making a positive impact. You're reaping financial reward for it. And, dare I say it, you are protecting the little guy against Goliath. So, I mean, that makes you kind of heroic in my book.
Well, I think it is very difficult to conceive of the idea that I am protecting the little guy against Goliath, because usually what happens in those cases is I tell them, you're about to be crushed, please move out of the way. But what has happened in the past 5 to 7 years is that technology has changed so much that the little guy doesn't have to go up against the big guy anymore. The little
Right.
guy can carve out their own space, get their own following, and build their own company, and not necessarily have to sign everything away to a DC. You might just, decide you're going to make your book, you're going to build up your following, you're going to launch your Kickstarter, or you're going to sell it on your website, or you're going to sell it through Amazon, and you
Right.
can have a nice little business that grows year over year. You're not necessarily competing with a $700 million company, because you don't have to. There's enough people and enough comic book readers and enough access to those people and those systems that it's not the way it was in the 70s and 80s, where if you wanted to be in comics and you didn't want to go through the underground, you had to go to the big guys. Now the big guys are an option, not the end all be all.
Do you think that is that a net positive for creators? Because not only is your opportunity more open, but your success is also more diffused.
Yes.
Because let's say, I mean, not that it ever worked out great for the artist, it always worked out better for the publisher. But as you state in your book, the publishers took the risk and they paid you to do the work. So if you're taking the risk, the barrier to entry for online is low, and it just is about your time as a creative. And then if you need to hire an artist because you can't draw or you don't like the art that you produce, that's a cost, and so on. And then you become an employer. Do you think that is, can you make a living as an independent comic creator? And what does that look like? How should I evaluate? I mean, I'm going to probably create anyways, but what does that look like? What is your educated understanding of that level of success? Even paying half your bills in a month.
Well, you have to look at it from depending on the 3 primary creative business models in comics, because you have independent publishing, like my book, you have freelance publishing, which is working for someone else, and then you have what's called creator-owned publishing, where you have an idea and then you bring the idea to a publisher, and the publisher underwrites a certain amount of the publication of that book in exchange for a percentage of the rights to that book. So because there's three different models, there's three ways that you have to understand what it would take to make a living. And when I say make a living, I mean to cover the cost of your expenses for you and your family and the actual production of the books themselves.
Right.
So in independent publishing, you have to be able to sell enough books every month or every quarter or every year to cover the cost of you and the cost of the books. And the problem there that I see in most cases is one of production. Because in a lot of cases, a independent publisher can put together a very good project and get it out into the world and make a considerable amount of money off that project, especially with crowdfunding options and other forms of distribution that are
Right.
currently available. But they really can only put out 1 or 2 books a year because they don't have the infrastructure to put out so many books every month. So
Right.
that means if let's say you make 25, 30,000 off of a book, and then the book costs you like 20, 10, 15, 20,000 to make. Now you've got 10,000 left. If you do that twice in a year, you got $20,000, which is a profit, but
Right.
it's not enough to live on. So
Right.
you would have to figure out a way to have that production 12 times instead of 2 times. And then you're in a spot, okay, now you're paying for yourself, you're paying for the books. For freelancing, it's a little bit different because the cost that you have to put in to get the book out the door, you're not paying. That's not your cost to pay. So what you have to do is you have to figure out how much work you can actually get, because freelancers in comics are generally paid in something called a page rate, which is the amount of money you get to produce a page.
Let me test to see what the number is. I've gotten quotes from about anywhere from $100 to $200 a page.
Well, is that for the artist, the letterer, the flatter, the colorist, the production designer?
That was just the artist / colorist.
Okay, and they were going to do line art. They were going to do their own basically pencils and inks.
Yes.
That is in the ballpark. The problem with page rates is there is no standard for a page rate. And a lot of things go into what a page rate might be in terms of the skill of the artist, the experience, their reputation, their time, what it is that you're asking them to do, where they live, because comics is a geographically dispersed production system. So you could have artists in Indonesia or in Belgium or whatever making your book. And because the cost of living is different in each one of those cities, what they might ask for you to actually produce the book is going to be wildly different than someone who's doing the art here in New York. So there's a lot of things go into a page rate, but for artists in 2021, $100 to $300 a page is not it's not a crazy number.
So go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, so knowing that every person who works on a book gets paid a different amount, the individual freelance artist has to figure out, well, how many pages do I need to do every month to actually cover all of my expenses? The problem with the freelance artist is only a portion of the time they put into their business are they actually getting paid for.
Right.
If they're developing the business and they're improving their craft, they're keeping up with the industry, they're taking care of their taxes, they're doing all that stuff, they're marketing, they're hustling, trying to get jobs. That's a lot of work, a lot of hours in a week that you're not getting paid for. So that lost cost has to get put back into the page rate. And then you're only able to produce a certain number of pages because you have to do all that other stuff.
Right.
So that you have to figure out the economics where the page rate that you're getting for the work that you can consistently gets you to a point where you can pay all of your bills. The upside is, of course, you don't have any cost. You don't have to pay to have the book printed and shipped and all that other stuff. That's not your problem. So you have that benefit, but you also have that other thing you have to, keep in mind when you're trying to figure out how to make a living. The creator owned is probably the most difficult business model to make a living on because you are relying on, in many cases, the royalties from the sale of the book. That's your primary source of revenue. So
Right.
let's say in 2022, I pitch an idea to a publisher, and then they say they're going to give me royalties based on the copies sold, but the book doesn't come out till 2024. And then when the book does come out, I get a portion of the wholesale price of that book. So which means in 2022, I didn't get any money. 2023, I didn't get any money. In 2024, I got some money, but it's probably not going to be enough to cover all of the expenses that I had for 2.5 years while I was waiting for that money to come in.
Right.
So now it could be that later on down the line, especially if you have a very successful book, more money comes in later. But the way creator-owned deals work, they're kind of icing on the cake. They are not necessarily whole revenue streams in and of themselves that you could actually live on because of the way the payments are timed. That was a long answer. Sorry, but did that make sense?
Yeah, no. As someone who's debating about these things, I mean, obviously I'm on social media. I'm trying to garner some attention for my work. I'm actually actively working on trying to become a somebody while I'm still a nobody. So I totally understand that because like everything that I'm doing has a time cost, has a creative cost, and then I'm also need to be good at the thing I want to be good at, right? So
Yes.
thankfully I've got, 20 years of doing various kinds of creative work. So I'm able to mode switch between those things, but I'm already at capacity, and I haven't even gotten anything yet. So this is, that's something that we have to calculate as artists. Like, do we want to be an employed artist? Do we want to be the person that owns it all and takes all the risk and gets all the reward? And then you have the variations that go in between that, because just because you have three models that you cite, you could be a creator-owned comic creator that intends on making the animated version of the piece, just like Marvel takes their content from flat pages to animated to movies. But that's a long tail because Disney has all the money in the world to do whatever they want and the impetus to constantly turn it out because their copyright takes 70 years. And if they don't, every time they release a new version, they get to hold on to that copyright. So, I'm being a little long-winded, but one of the things I learned, I was working for a bakery. Strangely enough, I was marketing and software design person for this bakery. But my boss at the time wanted to go buy foam, the #1 foam finger, right? Which is owned by a guy that owns a phone shop in Houston, Texas. His last name's Boss. Or Faust? Boss. I don't know. I'm still friends with that gentleman's daughter. She does yoga. And so one of the things that we learned is that the reason why Godzilla has any value at all, because it's God and lizard smashed together, is because someone sued every time someone tried to use a generic term Godzilla, because it definitely referenced the giant dinosaur creature. And it was only in the lawsuits that kept that property with value inside the United States. So you really see how it's not just copyright law, but your ability to defend your copyright.
Exactly.
And you have to be aggressively litigious with your copyright.
Yeah.
What happens to Creative Commons copyrights, or let's say the content that I put on Instagram? Is that still mine, or is that now out into the world and they can do whatever they want?
I believe you would have to, it would depend on what is in the terms of service of any social media platform that you actually post your work to.
Mm-hmm.
Certain sites, even certain sites like you look at digital comics like Webtoon or Global Comics or Tapas, you have to actually understand, especially if it's work that you created. I mean, work that you shared, it's not yours in the first place, so you shared it, so who cares? But if it's work that you own, you have to actually understand what the disposition is of those rights when you post. Because if the
Mm.
site is saying, well, you posted and you own it, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll also probably going to say, if you post it and you own it, and then someone sues us for it, it's now your problem because you own it. You
Mm.
could say, it could be terms of service could say you post it and we own it,
Mm-hmm.
because certain anime and manga publishers actively encourage their fan base to create fan fiction, to create fan manga and all this other kind of stuff and post it on their website. But
Mm-hmm.
some of these companies say, okay, if it's really good, we're going to own it and we're going to take it. Go ahead and do
Mm.
what you're going to do, have fun. But if you create like the next big thing, well, guess what? We're going to own it. And
Wow.
all of that, and every company that allows you what's called user generated content has terms of service that define what happens to the content once it's posted. So you have to be aware of that as you're like posting.
That's amazing because one of the things that you look at, there's section 230. So social media sites aren't publishers in the
Mm-hmm.
way that Marvel was a publisher, right?
Right.
So they're not liable for your content,
Mm-hmm.
but they may try and claim ownership of your content because they put
Mm-hmm.
it in a contract and you click OK and it gets what they're bringing to you as an audience, and what you're trying to do is capture an audience, and what it's supposed to be is a mutual feedback loop, except for the fact that when it comes down to it, and I'm sure they're trying to figure out how they're going to monetize their applications, and let's say your content becomes really important, they need to be incentivized to reward you for that content.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't have an incentive to reward you, that that seems like an incorrect contract. I mean, am I reading that situation right?
Well, in the case of that, a platform is trying to monetize based on user generated content. What
Uh-huh.
they need to do in the contract and in the business model is they have to be able to offer some sort of incentive. Like YouTube has very clear incentives. Once you cross a certain number of followers, once you cross a certain number of views, the money starts coming. And
Mm-hmm.
now YouTube has built a multi-billion-dollar business, and well, for a long time, they didn't make anything. They're making original shows now, but that's only because they have extra cash sitting around from all the other money that they're bringing in from content that they never made.
Right.
Um, Webtoons, to a certain extent, is doing the exact same thing. They put up a platform. They said, you guys make the comics, people make the comics, and then once you pass a certain threshold of views or users, they just start giving you cash, because what they're doing is they're actually becoming the conduit. So on one hand, you have the advertisers who are looking for attention because
Mm-hmm.
attention has value. On the other side, you have the people creating content who are actually getting attention, but they don't
Mm-hmm.
have any money.
Right.
So YouTube or Webtoon steps in the middle and says, okay, you provide the content, you provide the cash, we'll take a little bit off the top, everybody's happy. And that's how it works. And if you're actually allowing people to upload content and you have no way to actually generate money from that, one of two things is going to happen. A, people aren't going to upload the content, or B, you're going to run out of money, even though they love to upload the content,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have to figure there has to be a way that the content turns into cash. Otherwise, that business model does not work.
Hmm. What about NFTs? Like I
Mhm.
know everything I see is like, well, you got to make it an NFT. Oh, I've got this NFT, and I'm like, I'm trying to figure out, first of all, now not only do I have to be a good business person, I have to understand internet security,
Mhm.
with wallets and
Mhm.
coding and hashing and and then I've got to anchor it to some kind of blockchain,
Mhm. Mhm.
which seems to be a Madoff like Ponzi scheme to me as an artist. Like, if you tell me it's going to be X amount of dollars for me to help you do a contract, there's a company, you can go to them, you have this contract that says what you want, they know what they want. But now I'm just willy-nilly kind of just creating things, and I've got to find a way to um bridge the gap between the
Mhm.
technology of those things. How does NFT figure into those models that you were kind of talking about? Is it just content is content, like location in real estate is location,
Mhm.
or is it or is this another kind of way to make money out of the same content?
Well, it is NFTs from my understanding of them and the way that I actually advise clients on them is a secondary revenue stream that is very similar to merchandise. So if you have intellectual property that has a certain amount of certain following that people are interested in, one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that happens, especially with comic book related content, is that people who are fans of the story tend to want to collect things that are related to that content. That's why Marvel and DC make millions of dollars on t-shirts and hats, posters, all that other kind of stuff.
Right.
Because once you get someone to be a fan of Spider-Man, now they need Spider-Man socks or something like that. NFTs are basically a collectible in the same way that a Funko is collectible or a piece of art is a collectible. The difference is the NFT is digital. So the question then becomes, does it have value and should you be making them or owning them? And the way that I actually explain it to people is that there's only two people that really have to believe that your NFT has value. It's the same thing with any other thing that you collect. The
Mm.
person buying it and the person selling it.
Mm-hmm.
If those two people decide that this thing is worth $5, $5,000, $5 million, then that's what it's worth. I mean, if you think about Fabergé eggs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fabergé eggs sounds like a stupid idea. Like, why would I want this egg thing that's made of these things? But a Fabergé egg could cost tens of thousands of dollars because people have decided that's how much it costs.
Right.
NFTs are the same thing. One day people didn't think this was worth anything, then they did, and now I guess it is until they decide it's not, and then it's not. So as long as you are comfortable with the underlying foundation of why people want to collect things, understanding the underlying motivation of NFTs isn't that far-fetched. Now, from a legal standpoint, it is something that is still evolving because people are not necessarily sure, in many cases, what they're allowed to make into an NFT,
Mm-hmm.
what they could charge for an NFT, how they could actually prove that their NFT has the value that it has, all because all of these things are still evolving. And the
Right.
problem with technology and the law is that technology always moves exponentially faster than the law. So by the time lawyers, judges, courts, and everything else figures out what they want to do with NFTs, and then politicians write laws and they argue about what's going to happen with NFTs. By the time all that happens, technology would have created something else that they don't know how to deal with, and they will be caught flat-footed yet again. So the as a artist, as a creator, you have to wrap your head around the idea that you're going to your business is going to have to be nimble enough and flexible enough to deal with a certain amount of insecurity in the market, because the legal standards are constantly going to be shifting under your feet.
Right. Yeah, so that's an interesting conflict to maintain. Sorry, I'm going to stand up. My back hurts.
All right, Norris, take care of yourself.
And I'm there. So, yeah, I love my desk. The fact that I can stand up and sit down. This is like space age. We have talking dogs. You have basically it's free to distribute a comic book now. I mean, I remember when I researched getting a print run done, it was going to cost me $3,500. I could spend $3,500, have a banging website, a podcast, and the book. You know, before I even get to trying to print it on paper.
Exactly.
But that being said, as a filmmaker, I'm looking at the film market, the indie film market. It used to be you could do trunk drives, where you would go from place to place and show your film in a movie theater. And, or doing the MC Hammer with your mixtape, at the club. Do you think that kind of chutzpah based marketing approach to creative, is that still viable nowadays, do you think?
Absolutely. I think it's essential at this point. You're in, whether you're talking about comics or film or television or anything, any kind of narrative art, the idea that you can actually create a group of, or find and connect with a group of potential fans without using a studio, without using a larger corporation, you can actually build that group organically. And that group, once they're invested in your story, will give you money directly, is one of the things that has actually changed the business of being an artist in ways that have only been positive. You look at what people are actually able to publish and release based on Kickstarter. You're not just talking about comics, you're talking about films, you're talking about video games, you're talking about all sorts of things, because they go out, they make a product, they make a story, they find a group that wants to hear that story, and then that group gives them money. Now, after that, it could be that a wider distribution network like a Netflix or a Activision or whoever comes in and gives you more distribution. But at that point, you have much more ownership and control, because you didn't have to go to them with a vague idea and have them take it from you and do what they want. You got to do what you wanted. You are coming to them with the product, with the fan base, with the, if you do it the right way, with the distribution network. All they're doing at that point is they're amplifying your signal. They are taking you farther than you have gone on your own, only because there's only so much you can scale, as a independent solo or small business like creator. They can get it to 50,000 places. You could probably get it to 500 places. But, as long as they're giving you your cut, that's fine. But it's the idea of driving around with something and handing it to one person at a time. We still need that energy, but you have to translate that into what you're doing online.
So what you're saying is that despite the belief that artists are lazy, unmotivated, only interested in their ideas, that has to die at this point, because if you have even a small amount of success, I think we've covered that that's a whole lot of work. Like that's a whole lot of no one else doing it for you unless you have money. And if you don't have money, then you got to have the talent, the hustle, the business acumen, whatever it is to take your art, which, if you can be an art employee, then great. You don't have to do any of that. All you got to do is focus on your art. Right. But if you're going to be your own employer, which what artist isn't that the dream? Yeah, I want to make
Mhm,
what I want to make, and I want people to love me for that, right?
mhm, mhm.
Um, geez, man, I as charged up as I was at first, now I'm starting to get a little bit squirrely about the idea of all this work. I mean, yeah,
Here's
it's a
here's a
lot.
here's a tip. Here's a tip that I give to all of my clients. The idea is to start small. Start
Mm,
where you are with what you know you can do.
mm,
A lot of times, especially in the past like 3 years, a client will come to me and say they want to make this 192-page graphic novel epic. It's their first book. And I say to them, go back and do 5 pages. If you can do and understand what it takes to get the 5 pages done, go out and find the artists, go out and find the editor and everybody else. Actually make that project happen. Get the
hmm
letterer, get the thing put together, put it out online, get it printed if you want to get it printed, because then you actually have the entire business in microcosm. You
right,
didn't sink in 5 years of your life and $25,000 to make a thing that you didn't know how to produce or you
right.
didn't know how to market. You made 5 pages. And after the 5 pages, sit down with yourself and say, okay, do I want to, knowing what I know now, knowing
hmm
how much work it is to get 5 pages, do I want to keep going? Then you keep going. Then you make 22 pages, 20 pages.
Right.
And as you're actually building this, it's like, what was the analogy? Well, let's go back to you made a reference to the documentary you had. If I decided today that I want to start boxing, I
hmm
should not tomorrow then try to go fight Mike Tyson.
Right.
I've skipped some steps, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the same thing with comics. If you want to make a comic book, you cannot decide that you want to then, like, the first book you come out with is going to be your Watchmen or your magnum opus that you're going to create. Start out small.
Mm,
Just, I mean, it could be as small as just figuring out what story you're going to tell and why you want to tell that story,
mm,
because there's a lot of the motivation you have. Like the first chapter in the book is, why are you making comics? Because the motivation that you have is going to actually dictate all the other decisions you make. If you're making comics because you want to be part of the community of creators that make comics, that's great.
right.
You know, you don't have to sell 300,000 copies. You just have to make a comic. Once you make a comic, you're in the group.
Right.
That's it. If your goal is to like have a cameo in 25 movies over a 10-year period, well, that's going to take a little bit more, but at least you know which way you're going and how you're going to actually get there,
Right.
which is going to be very different. So understand your motivation, start small and build up to where you want to be, because you'll be much less nervous about the whole process if you know the process it's not that much. You're not running a marathon, you're just going to run to the corner.
Right.
And once you run to the corner, you run another block. And then you build on it.
That sounds like the advice I gave someone else that goes, we were talking about the idea of being a flip um teacher, the Fibonacci teaching method,
Mhm,
where I have something that I know and you have something you know, and I teach you what I know, and then you, the student, teach me
mhm,
what you know.
mhm,
And then that way, every single one of us have a thing that we contribute, and then something we can receive out of that relationship.
mhm,
And what we were talking about is, he goes, yeah, I really want to write, but I'm really nervous about doing it. And I'm like, well, this is the way I started writing, and I'm dyslexic. I've always had a horrible fear of publishing things because I can't see my spelling errors. What I
mhm,
see is what I intended, and
mhm,
then what the world gets after it goes out there and 12 people read it. Then I go, oh shit, I said here instead of here, right?
mhm,
I read the correct word, you know, because I'm good at understanding what my intentions were, but I'm shit at reading what I actually put out at times. Part of my language. So I said what I started doing is I put one big word that hold a lot of ideas that would beg me to write a second word to explain the first word, and
Mhm.
that what I would continue to do is just add words until I got a sentence, and then once you have a sentence, then you build to a paragraph, and once you get to a paragraph, then you build
Mhm.
to a chapter, and then you know what I mean. Like it's a journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first one.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing with comics. In fact, it is probably more applicable to comics than to a lot of other things because it is a iterative industrial line kind of process.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you decide you want to make a comic, you don't just make a comic. You have to start with the script. Then you
Mm.
have the character design. Then you have the setting and the modeling. Then
Mm-hmm.
you have, then you're building the rough pencils and
Mm-hmm.
then the finished pencils. And then so it's on and on. So the idea of building on the previous work and then using that to move forward is something that's inherent to comics. So it's actually very easy for comic creators to understand it when I explain it.
Yeah, I would say that I don't have $500 to pay you, but I
Mhm.
can at least give you the satisfaction of knowing that you have made a difference in the world, and that you and the things that you knew when you knew them, and the fact that you chose to share them for the creator has
Mhm.
done my personal life immense good, has allowed me to be a creative and understand the value proposition of being an employee when I'm an
Mhm.
employee, and when to own my own content and keep it out of other people's hands, you know. So that's you've contributed to 20 years, um, a wife and two children that are now functioning adults and living on their own as they see fit. So thank you. Thank you very much for that gift.
I I appreciate the sentiment, and you are extremely welcome. I did not realize that that little book that I put together in 2004 would actually lead to that result.
Yeah, and I bet unknowingly you have probably made that impact on at least 100 people throughout your time and your energy, and you know exactly which ones that have shared work back with you. And
Mhm.
what I hope is that I will be able to get back with you with some work soon, and you might even have time to read it.
Well, if you figured out a way to put more hours in the day, then that has nothing to do with what I taught you. But yes, when you have the work, you send it to me.
All right. Uh,
At the very least, I'll put it in the pile with all the other books.
and then I will be among greats. Um,
Exactly.
So, just to wrap it up, where can we get your current book? Do you have an
Mhm,
audio book?
mhm.
And where can we find you on the internet?
Okay. My book, The Business of Independent Comic Book Publishing, is available on Amazon, Google Books, Barnes and Noble, in print and in digital format. There is no audio book yet because I couldn't pay for enough the finished hours to make a 450-page book into an audio book. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to give people the PDF for all the charts and all the graphs anyway. So I was like, never mind. So there's no audiobook.
No
Um,
audiobook.
if you want to find if you want to find me online, because I provide free consultations to people when they're trying to figure out what they're trying to do with their comics, you can go to my website. It is called Creative Contract Consulting. It's all one word. Or you could just go into Google and type in Gamal Henessee, because Gamal Henessee is a fairly unique name. Not a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people have it. So you type in that name, you'll find the website, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Yeah, that should be enough.
All right. Excellent. One final question. This is totally
Mhm,
a right hook, and you can just tell me no and not
mhm.
answer the question. But how do you vote?
I You mean, do I vote remotely or do I vote in person? What do you mean?
No. I mean, like, how do you vote? Do you vote
Oh,
one party or another? Are you an independent? Like, how do you vote?
I state publicly that I am an independent because I would like to have the flexibility. And that's something that I decided when I was a political science student in college in like the late 80s. However, 99% of the time, we're voting blue just because the other option does not seem viable.
Well, that's entirely valuable and valid. And I thank you so much for being willing to answer honestly. What I hope is when I ask that question is that people will watch the whole podcast and get to the end and go, huh. So
Well,
with that,
it is a good way to kind of spice up the end as opposed to having, end with like a fizzle.
yes. All right. Well, thank you so much. Links will be in the show notes. And if I highly recommend both checking out his book and his podcast, his comics industry news, I think is invaluable. His perspective is based, in my opinion. And thank you so much. You've been a fantastic guest.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, let me end it. Wait, it did say recording.
Yeah, it still says recording.
Of course it does. This is why I need professionals to do this. Because I can't even get to the stop recording now. Oh my God.
Well, usually I know when I do my recordings every week, when I end the Zoom, then the recording starts to the Zoom starts to render the video.
Yes. And I'm going to have to. Why did it go off the page? All right. I'm just going to no, I don't want to quit Zoom. Where did it go? Where are you? Oh, there it is. And stop. And
Actually, it's
it's
still
still
says
going.
record.
I'm going to hit stop. And I'm going to leave it for all. I'll edit this out. Normally, I just have a follow-up at the end of the show where I go, so how did I do? Because I always want to get better as an interviewer. Did you feel engaged? Do you feel like your message got out?
I do feel the message got out. I do feel that it was engaged. There was some points in the middle where you started a thought, but then wasn't sure how you wanted to kind of cap off that thought to hand it off to me as a question. But other than that, I think it went fine.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much. The dirty end, as they call it in film, is not going to make it online. So now I've got to do a little bit of editing. But I look forward to pushing this out and promoting your stuff. Send me a bio with whatever information. I'm sure you have one prepared. That way I could just copy and paste it and it's worded correctly.
You got it. I will send it out to you in the next 10 minutes.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, sir. Have a good night.